Hi, and welcome back. I hope everybody had a good Yom Tif. This week's parsha for the third time, for third week, is Parsha Shmini. Starting off with a vert, we'll actually start with two this week. There's a well-known saying about Parsha Shmini, a year like this year. It says in the year that like this year that we actually read Parsha Shmini 8 times. So it's the saying goes, it's Shmini, Shmeina, Shmeina. Meaning if you read Parsha Shmini 8 times, it's going to be a Shmeina, a full saturated and healthy year. We read it Shmini 8 times because in Parsha Tzav we read it by Mincha. Then we had it Monday and Thursday of that week. And then the Shabbos was Pesach, so we didn't read Parsha Shmini. But then by Mincha, we again read Parsha Shmini on Shabbos. Chol Hamoed, we didn't read it, but that next Shabbos we did read it by Mincha. Then Monday and Thursday and Shabbos. So it's 8 times. Getting back to the Parsha itself, we find Rashi brings that all 7 days of the Meluyim, in other words, Parsha Shmini is, why is it called Shmini? It's the 8th day of the Meluyim, the days that they were bringing sacrifices when they were inaugurating the Mishkan. So Rashi says that the first 7 days, God's presence, the Shekhinah, did not rest. Only on the 8th day, when it says Reach Nechech LaHashem, from there we learn out that then it was Reach Nechech LaHashem, it was pleasant scent before God, and that's when God's presence dwelled on the Mishkan. The question is, they brought offerings the previous 7 days. And we know when you bring an offering and the fire would come down, it means it's Reach Nechech LaHashem, like we say it every day in davening. When you bring an offering, we say every day in davening that when you bring an offering, it's pleasant for Hashem, and so the Shekhinah dwells there. So what does it mean that the Shekhinah did not dwell there in the Mishkan for the previous 7 days? So we can understand this based on, we've touched upon this previous times, that there's 2 modes of the divine presence coming down. One is based on what we do, our Aveda, what we accomplish through our own work. And that is only according to what a person can reach. That is what the revelation will be. And since a person is limited, so a person will only grasp as much as he has the capacity to grasp. On the other hand, if something comes from Hashem, God who's limitless, as we were explaining in other classes about the Torah, that God invested himself in the Torah, limitless God, infinite God, put himself in the Torah, and that's how we are able to grasp him. So same thing, Parsha Shmini. Shmini is the 8th day. We know the 7 goes on nature. Nature is what we can reach and accomplish on our own. And the 8th day is, like the Bris Milah on the 8th day, is coming from God. And coming from God, it could be much more than what we can reach on our own capacity. And therefore, it doesn't mean that the previous 7 days there was no Shekhinah resting on the Mishkan. But it does mean that the previous 7 days, before he got to the 8th day, which is higher than nature, was all had a connection, and it was limited in a certain sense based on the work of the people themselves. As opposed to the Yom HaShmini, on the 8th day, that is coming from God, the infinite God, and that's really where the Shekhinah coming from above is resting upon the Mishkan. Moving on to a bite-size concept from Tanya. This is in Perek Vav of Tanya, if anyone's following along inside. So the previous weeks we were talking about the 10 spheres and the attributes and the godly soul, and the clothes of the godly soul, Machshava Dibur Maisa, the 10 spheres, and the intellect, and the emotions, and so on and so forth. Now we're going to switch to just like we find in holiness, there are these concepts of 10 spheres and so on, we also have in what is called Lu'umazeh, meaning the other side, which is how the Tanya terms things that are not holy. It calls it the other side because the way it looks at things, the way Torah looks at things it's either holy or it's not. So anything on the not holy side is considered the other side. It's called Sitra Achra, which includes things that are negative and so on, and there's different levels. But everything that's not holy is called Sitra Achra, the other side. So in the other side, there are also 10 spheres. But over here, the spheres are not called spheres. They're called Eser Kisin de Misavusa, the 10 crowns of profanity or of impurity. And they are just like we have in holiness, the same way we have in not holiness, chesed, gvura, tiferes, all these attributes, we have them in here as well. And just like in holiness, we have the emotions coming from the intellect, so too we have in the Eser Kisin de Misavusa, on this side of negativity, on the other side, we also have the emotions coming from the intellect. But there's a key difference to how these 10 spheres of holiness and the 10 spheres of not holiness work. In holiness, we explained there's the intellect, and the intellect was called Abba ve'ima. They were called the parents, and the parents beget the emotions. In other words, we contemplate the greatness of God, and we get from there, we beget from there, we have the children, we have the emotions, the love of God, the fear of God, and so on. When it comes to the Kisin Misavusa, when it comes to the other side, it doesn't work like that. The truth is, while we say the emotions come from the intellect, it only comes from the intellect in the sense that the intellect sort of controls how they shall be. But the emotions themselves can exist and do exist even independently of the intellect. In other words, the person has a desire, has his desires for various things. Maybe when he was young, it's candy. When he grows older, it may be for more expensive items, cars, whatever it is. But the desire doesn't come from the intellect. The intellect does control that when he's a child, he has smaller desires, and when he's older, he has more sophisticated desires. He wants more. He has a greater understanding. This is not really worth anything. I have more taivas desires, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, the emotions come from the intellect, but the emotions themselves are independent, because in the truth, when we talk about the other side, not the side of holiness, but the side, the Sitra Achra, it's mainly about emotions, not so much about intellect. There is intellect, but intellect is sort of directing the emotions, but the emotions are independent and can come even without the intellect. The person just has a desire for he sees something, he wants it, he didn't really think about it. Maybe later he'll think about it, and he'll have, maybe when he works with his intellect, so he'll see other things, he'll want other things, but then the emotions work independently of the intellect as well. And when a person uses their faculties, their machshava, dibur, maisa, their mind, their speech, or their action to fulfill these desires, so in a sense, they're coming to clothe the garments of the Sitra Achra. So just as we have garments in Kedusha, we also have garments in Sitra Achra. But there's an interesting thing. We said they're called Eser Kisin de Misavusa, 10 crowns of profanity or negativity, of impurity. And it's interesting, why do we call them crowns? In holiness, we don't call them crowns. Here we call them crowns. And there's a number of reasons given. One of them is that it's just like a crown. A crown encircles the person. It's something that's makif, it surrounds, but it's not internalized. So too, when we talk about these 10 spheres in the Sitra Achra, they too are not internalized. They're just, in a sense, encircling, encompassing the person, but not internalizing. But there's a deeper reason why they're called kisir misavos, the crowns of profanity. Crowns, we know when we're talking Kabbalistically, even in the side of Kedusha, there's the 10 spheres, and then there's what's called keser, the attribute, the level of keser, which is higher than the attributes. Keser is sometimes also called Tayu, the world of Tayu, the world of chaos, where over there the spheres, the attributes, are not integrated one with the other. Each one is at a separate point. We may elaborate on this at maybe a different time. But each one is a different point and one under each other as opposed to integrated. And this is the concept of we have Shviras HaKelim, that there was a very high level of holiness, but the vessels broke and they fell into this mundane world, and we have to uplift them. And the same thing, without getting too much into this, which we'll leave for a different time, but the same thing is what we're saying with these desires. In a certain sense, their source is also from Keser, from the world of chaos. In other words, a very high level of Kedusha, but only from a point of it, not fully internalized. And therefore, in a sense, even these negative traits that a person has, they too, the negative spheres, or spheres in the Sitra Achra, they too have a high level source in holiness, and it's our job to transform them and uplift them, because they are, in a sense, have an even higher source than just the regular 10 spheres in Kedusha. That's for the concept in Tanya. Getting to a point in halacha. So thinking now that our shul is sort of moved to Menorah Plaza, we have more of a sort of a commercial, not a commercial, but a more maintenance is there done more often. There's a question that people ask, and actually was asked also by a member of the shul. What happens if you have in the toilets? They sometimes put some they put like some colored bar. Let's say many times it's blue. Let's say when you do so, when you flush, it leaves off some disinfectant that goes into the water. May also give it a smell. It cleans it, and it also colors it. And we know there's a question, a big question on Shabbos, whether you're allowed to color something. It's tzeveya. It's one of the lamites malachas. Is coloring things on Shabbos. You're not allowed to color something. You're not allowed to dye. So is this a problem? In fact, there's a discussion and a disagreement between contemporary rabbis whether this would be a problem or not. Some say that it's only groma. You're not directly causing this to happen. You're flushing, which indirectly causes this to let out this chemical, or the water goes over the bar and so on. And second of all, we know that it says there's no tzeveya dying with regards to water. So they hold because of that it should be permitted. Others say that no, you are doing it. And this that we say that there's no dying in water, that is only if it's water that is intended to drink. But if you're not intending to drink this water, well, I hope you're not, then maybe tzeveya would apply. In practice, most rule that as long as you don't intend on coloring the water, in other words, your intention is to flush and that the water be clean, but you don't care necessarily that it have this clean color. They use blue because it looks clean, even though it's not necessarily any cleaner than green if they would use green. But green doesn't look as clean, right? But if your intention is that it should be clean, not about the color, so then it would be permitted and there's no problem with flushing it. But if you intend on making the water blue, let's say, then that would be a problem to use that facility on Shabbos. So to recap, going back to the beginning, we first said a word about Parsha Shmini. First of all, we noted that it's our eight. We're going to be reading Parsha Shmini for the 8th time this Shabbos, and it says that means that it's going to be a good, healthy, satiated year. Then we asked, why do we say that only on the 8th day the Shekhinah rested? Seemingly they brought sacrifices all the other 7 days as well. So why by Yom HaShmini, which is how the parsha starts off, does Rashi point out that it's only then that the Shekhinah rested? So we said that doesn't mean that the Shekhinah did not rest at all the previous 7 days, but as the previous 7 days was 7 days, his nature was the work that they served Hashem from their own capacity. So whatever level was drawn down, Shekhinah came down, was only reflection and in comparison to themselves, their limited selves, as opposed to the 8th day, which is higher than nature, was the Shekhinah rested as it comes from the Shekhinah, which is infinite, which is limitless. Then we explained that from Tanya, we said just that like there's 10 seris in Kedusha, there's also in the Sitra Achra, which means the other side. We said that there's a slight difference, even though by both of them we say the emotions come from the intellect. By Klippa, when we say the emotions come from the intellect, it doesn't mean that they're born from the intellect, as it is in Kedusha. Over in Klippa, it means they're independently there. The person has his desires regardless of the intellect or not. It's just that the intellect directs, and it's according to how great the personal intellect is or how small it is, that's how and what they have desires for, and that's also what they have. They get angry at. A child gets angry at smaller things, and an adult at larger things, right? It's all dependent upon where they're holding in their intellect, but it's not that they're born from the intellect. And then we pointed out that the reason why it's called crowns, kisidimis avusa, crowns of profanity, is because of one, that it's like a crown. It's not internalized. It's not really who the person is. It's just an external thing that circles around the person. Number two, we said that its source on a deeper level is actually from a very high level from Keser, but it's just a point, but it comes from Keser. And then we said the halacha about if you can use especially in public places where they have some disinfectant that's colored, whether you can flush and use that toilet on Shabbos. So we said there's a question. Some say it is a problem. Some say that it's not a problem since you don't have intention for it to be that color, and it's water. And we said in practice, as long as you don't intend on having the water colored, you just intend on flushing and cleaning the thing, but not actually coloring it, it is not a problem, and you may use it on Shabbos. Have a good night.